Hi guys, welcome back. So some really interesting news, really exciting. The British and Irish Lions are looking into launching a women's side. Now, is the game ready for that? Well, it's the feasibility study they're doing at the moment. And on the feasibility group, headed up by Ian Evans, the Lions legend, are players, of course. Of course, there's representatives of the four unions, but also are all the sponsors and the broadcasters. So they're very much looking at absolutely everything about a potential women's British and Irish Lions team and how would it work. Now I'm going to give you my view on this and some options, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are and how you might be able to make it work if you think it would work at all. Now obviously, firstly, before it even gets off the ground, you need the financials in place. Now the sponsors, I think, are going to be on board, to be honest. They're going to want to make this happen. The Lions brand is a massive brand, and if they can get it out twice every 4 years instead of once every 4 years, that would be great. Can they get the TV rights? Well, I think Sky will want to show it, absolutely. Can they fill the stadiums? Well, they're already filling stadiums for big internationals for women's games, so I can't see why an even bigger event like the British Irish Lions wouldn't fill a stadium. So, but I don't know the exact financials, but hopefully it is feasible in some form and those sponsors and the broadcasters get on board. Anyway, they're going to need to raise a decent amount of money, of course, because they are an independent entity and they do have to pay to get these players released, but hopefully it will be a go on the financial side. Now, the second thing for feasibility is actually, I think, selection. Now, in the men's game, England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales are actually fairly close together. I know you can argue some are more stronger than others at times, but they can beat each other and they are fairly close. And indeed, in the last Lions tour, the Scottish players, which were underrepresented in previous tours, were much better represented. Now, that's not quite the case in the women's side. You have England, who are by far the strongest team out of the four. Ireland have been very strong but have dropped off a bit. Wales are really struggling. So in selection, do you go for the pure meritocracy approach of the men's side? Or do you actually, dare I say, go for minimum numbers from each nation? Because if you want to get all the fans on board, surely you need a good representation for all four nations, even if at the moment they're not quite on an equal playing field. So do you say they must have 5 from each nation in a squad? I know a lot of people don't like this because, of course, elite sport is meant to be a meritocracy, but if you're going to get it off the ground, maybe that's a goer. Let me know what you think. It'll be interesting to know for sure. But sometimes you might have to bite the bullet and go for that sort of thing. Or does that mean it is actually not feasible yet and you need to wait until those sides are closer together? Okay, so let's say it's feasible to select a side from the four nations. Now, hopefully that will be the case. Now, who do they play? Now, of course, in the men's game, it's a 4-year rota where they play New Zealand, South Africa and Australia in a rotation once every 4 years or once every 12 years for each of those individual nations. Now, could they do that for the women's game? No, I don't think so, actually, because New Zealand, they're number 2 at the moment in the world, but they certainly have been the best side in the world for quite a long time, winning the majority of World Cups. So they would be absolutely fine to tour. But Australia, I don't think are quite strong enough. And South Africa, their women's side definitely isn't strong enough. So at the moment, I can only really see New Zealand as an individual tour. Or, as a second option, you put them all together and have them as a representative side with New Zealand, Australia and South Africa combining together. Now, to start with, my preference would be go on an exploratory inaugural tour to New Zealand. I think that would work. They're a fantastic side. The public is rugby mad, and I think you'll be able to fill stadiums if you marketed it correctly. So I can see that as a goer to start with. Do you then move to a combined team against them? So once every 4 years, you have the British and Irish Lions against a combined Southern Hemisphere giants, shall we say, whatever you want to call them, of New Zealand, Australia and South Africa. I could see one of those two options working on a 4-year cycle. But what the women's game doesn't need to be do is bound by history. Sure, they want to use the history of the British and Irish Lions to market themselves, but they don't have to limit themselves to what the men do. They do have a bit more of a blank canvas. So could they incorporate more sides? For example, could they add Japan into that side, that combination side Now, it wouldn't be a Southern Hemisphere side now because obviously Japan isn't actually in the Southern Hemisphere, but in that part of the world, I guess it's kind of a bit of a fit. So maybe you could have it so it's 4 sides versus 4 sides on a 4-year cycle. Or could you go even more inclusive and get the brand of the British and Irish Lions playing, sure, a combination side from the Southern Hemisphere / Japan, or maybe a European side? France are a fantastic European nation, very strong, certainly give England a run for their money a lot in the Six Nations. Italy are very handy as well, and maybe Spain and Russia could join them for a European combined side, whatever they'd be called. And what about the USA and Canada? Both very good rugby nations in the women's game. Canada current number 3s in the world. USA have won the World Cup before, been to finals, so they're no mugs either. Could you have some sort of rotation with 4 representative sides, or however you might want to do it? Anyway, guys, there's a few options of how I think the British and Irish Lions could work in the women's game. Do they follow the same format as the men, or a similar format to the men? Or do they break out and forge their own format that's a bit more inclusive and developing the world game as a whole? I'd love to know your views on this, guys. Pop them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.